Okay, so the last few days in professional sport have been very, very interesting. Now, Man United have crashed out of the Champions League, so that's another trophyless season for Manchester United. Tottenham, obviously, are going to go without a trophy this season as well. So two of the big six involved in the European Super League this time last year are winning nothing. Obviously, the ongoing situation with Chelsea, we know that their emergency special license runs out on the 31st of May. So the future around Chelsea Football Club past the 31st of May, even though there are offers on the table to purchase the club, is exceptionally uncertain. And they play tonight in the FA Cup against Middlesbrough away at the Riverside. That will be very, very interesting. Obviously, they put in a request to the FA to have the game played behind closed doors. Middlesbrough, very openly, their chairman very openly came out and said it was a disgrace. Very shortly after that, they withdrew their application for the game to be played behind closed doors. That was very quickly withdrawn. It'll be interesting to see how the off-field issues are affecting the team. It's a knockout game, winner takes all. There is no second attempt to get over the line. There are no more replays in the FA Cup post the second round this season. And we'll see if they can put a performance in against Middlesbrough, who are flying high in the Championship in a good vein of form. They will not be intimidated by what they're going to be facing. And it will be interesting to see the backdrop in regards to Chelsea Football Club and what's going on off behind the scenes. I do feel sorry for the staff at Chelsea Football Club. I do feel sorry for the players, the coaching staff. They've been facing a lot of difficult questions that aren't related to what's happening on the field, which is completely out of their control. And it's the same could be said for Newcastle as well, and other clubs. Managers and players have been facing questions about situations that they have no control over. And I referred to Simon Jordan on TalkSport last week during his presenting segment when this question got raised about club ownership. I think he hit the nail on the head, quite frankly. I think he hit the nail on the head where midway through the Premier League era, so since 1992, the TV money was growing year on year. We only had, until Chelsea were taken over by Roman Abramovich, we only had 3 Premier League winners up to that point since 1992 in 12 years. Blackburn being a one-off, and of course Man United and Arsenal were trading titles quite regularly in that period. And then that opened the door to basically a wave of overseas ownership, for good and for bad. The issues within football, however, are a bit more than just who owns clubs. The player wages are an issue. I think many people would say they are overpaid. The wage inflation is almost hyperinflation. Ticket prices in this period have also reared their ugly head, and there now is a cap on league away prices, not cup away prices, and that's still rearing its ugly head and has done this season. The TV deal itself, from the beginning in 1992 all the way through till now, several TV companies have actually gone bust in that period. And I make reference to Setanta and ITV Sport, the pay-per-view subscription ITV channel that nearly bankrupted ITV itself back roughly about the time Abramovich took over Chelsea. I think the irony there is. So 2 TV companies have gone bust. We've got issues with BT Sport. They have been hemorrhaging money since inception. And as an EE customer, I can tell you that, yes, my phone bill and internet bills are propping up BT Sport as part of the BT Group. There's been concerns about TV rights being put behind a paywall for the Champions League and Europa League. So there's a lot of issues within football. And during the COVID pandemic, and I will be doing a video on the last 2 years, because it's been almost 2 years to the day that we shut down as a society with COVID restrictions and sport basically shutting down as well in the lead up to those restrictions being put in place. It's been almost 2 years. It's almost been 2 years to the day. I think on the 22nd, it would have been 2 years to the day that the first restrictions in the UK at least were brought into place. Although sport have been shutting down and leagues across the world were shutting down at this point anyway. The issues within the finances of football were heavily exposed 2 years ago. and multiplied. The financial mismanagement and the weak governance within the sport was exposed. Other sports also had their governance and finances exposed as well, and there were government grants and handouts and loans organised during this period. The RFL, the ECB, for example, the various rugby unions, all received government assistance at various points. It's been an interesting one. Now, other leagues and other sports around the world also had to shut down, hemorrhaging money without games being played. Obviously, the resumption of play talks that each league had to have with its players unions, arena operators, stadium operators, local government, and national governments. There's been, changing restrictions, easing of restrictions, tightening of restrictions throughout the last 2 years. It's not been a universal policy from country to country and within countries as well. So, yes, the last 2 years have definitely rewritten the rule book, so to speak. And what is interesting is this time last year, Chelsea were actually posting a profit, whereas the rest of the clubs that were involved in the European Super League were posting losses, apart from Liverpool, who did not disclose their finances, which is also very, very striking to note. Flip it over to rugby union with the Leicester Tigers and the Saracens salary cap issues that were clearly taking place during the run-up to the COVID pandemic and the shutdown. And Saracens had just received their punishment from the RFU and the Premiership in regards to their points deductions and their eventual relegation from the top flight of rugby union in this country. And of course, Leicester were doing the same thing at the same time, but they were aware of what level they could get to before they hit a points deduction. So what is frustrating is all the clubs at the beginning of every season sign up to the rules that are put in place. They agree to them and then they just break them. It's exceptionally interesting what's happened with Leicester. Fans are left frustrated with the way that Saracens was dealt with and the way that Leicester have been dealt with. But there were rules put in place that if there were a salary cap breach of any kind, the levels of severity of punishment, which wasn't clear to us at the time as fans. And it has left a lot of people frustrated with the lack of transparency. The weakness of government is clearly, of sports governance, has clearly been exposed by this second salary cap scandal in as many years. They escaped with 2 fines. Saracens got fined and had points stripped and ended up being relegated. Of course, the Premiership is now ring fencing itself, which is frustrating for those clubs in the Championship that want to take that next step. And I think it would be frustrating for players playing in the Championship who want to play at a higher level and probably could play at a higher level. So there is the haves and have-nots in rugby union. You could argue over the state of professionalism in rugby union since 1995. You could argue that that's not been dealt with in the right way and hasn't worked as intended. There's been a lot of unintended consequences that have been negative for the sport when it comes to rugby union, and I think they're being manifested right now. Rugby league as well, the collapse of the Toronto Wolfpack and that expensive experiment with the Super League structure was sped up by COVID. The Ottawa Races experiment never getting off the ground and relocating for a second time back to the UK. So the expensive North American experiment for rugby league in the UK with the Super League structure, I think has been a unmitigated failure. Rugby league in this country is in a mess. The delayed World Cup, I think, has had a massive impact on the RFL's finances. And hopefully, yes, it does take place without any problems at the end of this year. In 6-7 months' time, hopefully it does go ahead in full with no issues and works and is a great product and a great advert for the sport, because the sport in this country needs positivity at this time. The NRL dealt with the pandemic far better in Australia and New Zealand. They were much more engaged with local and regional government over there and federal governments over there in order to get the sport resumed and play resumed in a timely fashion. And the products, are far better, over there. You could argue some of the rule changes they brought in have had mixed consequences. 3 years worth of rule changes and rule tweaks. It is a bit frustrating as a fan. Just let the rules settle down for a little bit, and we've got expansion coming in next season with the Red Cliff Dolphins joining the league. So the league is spanning 17 teams. And then the question mark is where and when does the 18th team join? Which location will get an 18th team? What season will they come in to grow the game over there? The renegotiation of the TV deals is going to be very, very important for next season. And that's something, again, where the Super League, I think, is on the back foot. Yes, Channel 4 in this country have got some games, not a lot of games, whereas in Australia it's split between free-to-air and pay-per-view, and every game is televised, whereas over here only a percentage of games are televised, which, again, is a problem with it, showing the product to a wider audience outside the traditional fan base and trying to get new fans in. Obviously, we've also seen the end of the Major League Baseball lockout and spring training beginning, and it's delayed start to the regular season, although no games will be lost. They've been rescheduled, so it's going to be a very condensed regular season. How long Labour Peace lasts in Major League Baseball we'll have to wait and see, obviously. That in itself is going to be exceptionally interesting, I feel. Whether the players really are actually happy with the agreement they've agreed to. There is still disagreement between the Players Association. There wasn't unanimous vote in favour. The executive board was still against the deal on the table. The players obviously had said, look, we're not getting paid here unless we've got signing bonuses. They've got to be paid or deferred salary to be paid. So a lot of players weren't getting paid at this point. And the longer it went on, players aren't getting money. And those players on the lower salaries, while they are well compensated in real terms compared to the general population, they've still got bills to pay. They've got mortgages, medical bills, insurance, family costs, food costs. They need to get paid, and I think that led to the agreement, getting over the line. While it's improvement on their previous deal, I think there's still issues within Major League Baseball where they've just pushed the issue down the road by 5 years with the CBA. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is a breakdown in relationship between the players and the league before then, and there's a players' strike. I would not be surprised if there is actually a grudgingly. I think they signed it grudgingly. I don't think the players were over enthused with the deal on the table. But as a player group of player reps, they decided to vote in favour of the league deal on the table. There were some concessions by both sides. But I think the PR damage and the reputational damage done is there. This is a league that's still recovering from the steroid scandal of the early 2000s and the late 90s when evidence came to light of widespread steroid use within the sport. This is still a league that's reeling from the sign stealing scandal, so teams breaking the rules to gain an advantage. Did I watch the rugby league game on Channel 4? What do I think of it? No, I watched the NRL. It's a far superior product. Well, I'm happy that the Super League is getting some free-to-air coverage. I think the deal could have been better. I understand it's a small start. It's a small step in the right direction, but the rugby league, there are clubs facing insolvency. There are clubs having to go to semi-professional status that were fully professional. The infrastructure of some club stadiums are in a terrible state. And while I didn't watch the game, I think it's a positive step to get a wider audience nationally for the product. But the NRL is a far superior product than Super League. They with the COVID pandemic, they resumed play quicker. Within 8 weeks, they were back playing, where it took months for the Super League to get back playing. they made, I think, the right rule changes. I think they made too many rule changes too quickly, but I think they made the right rule changes when they needed to improve the product from what went before the pandemic. And I think the rule tweaks this season, I think, is what they should have made last season. If I'm being honest, the issues with I listen to a lot of rugby league podcasts, and a lot of them are very negative about the way rugby league in Europe is governed and run. Um, and if you compare the two leagues, I mean, yes, the NRL doesn't have promotion relegation. It wouldn't work with their business model and their structures with reserve grade or Queensland Cup and New South Wales Cup. It just wouldn't work. And that idea for the NRL has been muted. And this, bearing in mind, rugby league in Australia in this time, the mid '90s, was in chaos itself, and the future of the game was in doubt. At the time in the '90s, there was a lot of concerns about the direction the game was taking, and I think to a certain extent, that's still a sport that is recovering from the Super League war. The battle between what became the Australian Rugby League, which was New South Wales Rugby League before that, and the Super League idea, and is still somewhat recovering on a wider scale from that. Look at the West Tigers, look at the St George Illawarra Dragons as dual venture clubs, the Northern Eagles, which was northern suburbs of Sydney, the North Sydney Bears and the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles. Their agreement didn't last very long. North Sydney Bears are still, in New South Wales Cup. Paramount's first two games not very convincing as a top 14. There's been a lot of points scored in their first two games, but yes, it's early in the season. I think a good way to take a litmus test, that's a good phrase, would be, I would say, after around round 5, round 6, so a month and a half into the season. And if those same issues haven't been corrected, then yes, you can go, okay, that there are structural issues with how the team is set up to defend. In attack, they can score points. But they've got a lot of players off contract at the end of the season that are leaving, that are going to the Dolphins or other teams. And they've had a lot of players leave in the off season as well. So their roster management, I think, is more of a concern with how they're playing defensively. But the last couple of seasons, they've shot out the blocks, and raced to a very strong position in the ladder, and then they faded towards the end of the season. I think we'll see how they're going after 5, 6 rounds and into the Origin period. That's a good point to go, okay, who's going to make finals? You have a good idea who the top 8, top 12 are going to be and who the wooden spooners are going to be by that point. There's still another full day of games to play tomorrow. So not every team has played their second round matches yet. It's been a mixed bag for a lot of teams. Only a couple of teams have won both their opening games. Some teams have lost both their opening games. Other teams have won one, lost one. So it's shown how competitive the league is after the first 2 weeks. But until all the games are played this weekend, and I will do my round 2 review after the final game tomorrow is played. How big a win was it for Everton last night, and what's your thoughts on teams like Rangers and Bodo Glimt making the finals? Everton, that's an important win. I think the bottom 3 or bottom 4 is going to be pretty much decided, if I'm brutally honest. Rangers and Bodo Glimt from Norway. This is where I think the Champions League format is broken, and I think removing the Cup Winners' Cup is a broken system, because they're relegated to a secondary competition. And if you look at the structures of European football historically, the year you were born, which is 1997, I'm assuming by your handle there, Jordan, is when the Champions League format went from straight knockout to the group stages. So the year you were born, they reformatted the Champions League a second time in 5 years, after they had rebranded it in 1992. And of course, the Cup Winners' Cup and what was the UEFA Cup, which is now the Europa League, they had already, because they'd restructured the Champions League, it put pressure on the other 2 European Cup competitions, which meant we lost one in 1999, which is where Bodo Glimt and Rangers would have had more success and got that wider TV exposure in the straight knockouts. That is, I think, something that UEFA have missed a trick on. You get more teams playing in Europe, ironically, but less fixture congestion, and that is the problem with TV companies and the TV revenue, and the clubs wanting more money, whereas player welfare has become a secondary, and fan enjoyment has become a secondary to make as much money as possible for UEFA and the big clubs. This is where the European Super League debate. Every time we have seen the UEFA Champions League reformat itself, or the European competitions be slightly reformatted, there has been a threat from this kind of European Super League or a similar named product by a handful of big clubs. And not all of them have been successful recently. I'm going to put that out there. Not all of these Big 12 clubs have actually had success in Europe in recent times. They've had a historical success, Tottenham notwithstanding, because why were they in the Big 12? Ridiculous. They've got a shiny toilet bowl of a stadium that's soulless, and they can't fill it every week. Who knew? I think it's a good thing. I think because the UEFA coefficient has changed regularly, I think that's hampered some of those smaller, like the Norwegian and Scottish leagues, have been hampered somewhat by the changes in the UEFA coefficient that happen regularly. In regards to what my thoughts are, I think it's positive. However, I think the way UEFA have dealt with the European competitions from the 90s through till now has been shambolic, because they've caved into the club power and they've allowed the TV companies to have far too much say when they sign their sponsorship deals and their TV deals every 5-6 years. And with BT Sport putting everything behind a paywall, there's pushback against that. Whether when it comes to the next bout of TV and media rights, whether the free-to-air and the streaming services get a bigger say. Now, I'm not a fan of Amazon having rights to Premier League games and rugby union and the autumn internationals. I will say this. I would bring back the Cup Winners' Cup. I'll bring back straight knockouts from the first round all the way through to the final, because you actually get more teams playing in Europe and actually less games played, which benefits all leagues. So you can get rid of the UEFA coefficient crap they brought in since the 90s, which I think actually hampers those leagues that used to be on the same playing field as the Big Five. The UEFA coefficient is a flawed system, and it actually harms domestic leagues, which is where we've seen the money issues in recent years. How do I think Jackson Hastings will go at the Tigers? I think it's the worst club for him to go to. Any other club, he could play 9, half-back. He could play the 14 role as a utility, because he can play in the centres. You could play him dummy half. You could play him at 7, 6, 9, or the 14 off the bench, possibly even fullback, because in the Super League he did prove himself to be a bit of a utility. I wouldn't say it's his last chance. I just think he's gone to the wrong club, because it is the West Tigers and their recruitment policy is the mess, and they always pay overs for players. I feel sorry for Michael Maguire. Tim Sheens has gone back in there as in a consultancy role, which never works, by the way. There's always an issue. Look at Gus at Canterbury, where he was at Penrith and other clubs, where he's basically fallen out with the coach and sacked the coach, even if the coach is doing reasonably well. I would say Jackson Hastings is a good player. He had some attitude issues when he was at the Roosters, which led to him, coming over to Super League and fixing those issues. He's come back a more mature player. However, he's gone to the West Tigers, which is a mess of a club, and has been a mess of a club since the mid-2000s. They've only had a couple of years of decent success. They're a dual venture club from two clubs that have basically gone bankrupt and were facing liquidation in 1999. Balmain were not as bad as Western Suburbs financially, but the Western Suburbs team in the last 2 seasons they were going, I've done a video on that, historically bad. I think that sped up their demise. But the money issues with Balmain have been the last couple of seasons. They were a standalone club. Western Suburbs, the Magpies, have had financial problems for 15 years. And it hampered their ability to put decent teams on the field. So the backdrop to the dual venture of the West Tigers is a mess. And I think Jackson Hastings has gone to the wrong NRL club. I think Canberra could use him. Gold Coast could possibly use him, although AJ Brimson's now slotted into that halves role and from fullback, and he actually had a very positive impact in the game today for Gold Coast. Other clubs could use a Jackson Hastings more than West Tigers, because West Tigers mismanage players, and West Tigers is just a basket case of a club. And I feel sorry for Tigers fans. I feel sorry for Magpies fans and Balmain fans. What is their home ground? They're basically exiles in Western Sydney, whereas Parramatta and Penrith have established themselves really well. They've got better lower grade and youth grades and a selection pool of youth talent to develop. So they've already messed up their youth policy. They look at the players they've lost: Josh Adokar, Mitch Moses. I think was Ryan Pappenhausen there as well. They've lost talent to rival clubs within the league. They've lost talent overseas to the Super League as well. So their talent retention, their roster management's been a shambles since for over a decade. Their salary cap's a mess. They always have to pay over the going rate for talent. They've signed some bad players. They've signed players that haven't fit into the system. Maguire is a Premiership winning coach. He's a winning coach in the NRL and in Super League. He's been given an absolute toxic culture to deal with. I think that fly on the wall documentary, The Tales of Tiger Town, last season was a mistake. It put even more emphasis on the situation at West Tigers. Their form went completely down the toilet. That last game of the season was against Canterbury summed up everything that's wrong with it. The Conference League was supposed to be the cup for the small teams like it. Yes, but in reality, it should be the Cup Winners' Cup and straight knockouts. It's just another layer of fixture congestion, and it's not really been, I would say, well promoted. If I'm going to do a video on how I would structure UEFA Cup competitions, but that's my opinion. I think UEFA have got the structures of the European club competitions very, very wrong, and it actually has damaged those leagues that were on an equal footing with the so-called Big Five, where their clubs get less chance to play in the Champions League and Europa League because of the stupid UEFA coefficient, which we can argue is positive and negative for the sport, but in my opinion, I think it's more negative than positive. That's personal opinion. I think the way they've structured the European club game is a mess. I think they could have structured it better. And every time they've restructured the Champions League format and the Europa League, UEFA Cup format, and getting rid of the Cup Winners' Cup and sort of merging that with what was the UEFA Cup format, which was rebranded as the Europa League, has created problems because you always hear managers going the fixture congestion and managers being under pressure to put the best team on the field every match, and they can't because player welfare. And regardless of what you think of the players, they dive too much, they're overpaid, blah 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 blah. I have a lot of sympathy for coaches. I really do. Fixture congestion is a massive problem, and if we are talking about athlete welfare, then there has to be a way to reduce fixture congestion, and the way to do that is structure the cup competitions to straight knockouts like they were in the 90s, and then suddenly the fixture congestion disappears. Plus, you get more teams playing at the top level in Europe and performing at the top level in Europe, which ironically benefits more leagues. So you actually improve the quality across Europe on a more level playing field. You increase the revenues across Europe on a more level playing field. However, the TV companies, especially the overseas TV rights, and this is where some of the clubs have marketed themselves exceptionally well over the last 20, 30 years as global brands. There was already the famous clubs like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Liverpool, Man United from pre-Champions League era that were just dominantly successful. But it's the way certain clubs have branded themselves to the wider overseas audience, be it in Asia or North America, that has sort of led to this problem. They've been too successful in selling their product. They've been too good at branding themselves. And UEFA hasn't been good enough at branding their competitions and their structures and keeping them traditional. Get rid of the replays, get rid of the aggregate score, the away goals rule. I think that was a positive thing they've done. But the structures they had in place was perfect. They allowed the clubs too much commercial power, and then they also allowed the TV companies to dictate to them how the sport should be played. This is where I think the TV rights debate, is there too much money? There is too much money in European football. I think it has damaged the wider quality of football, because I've always argued that the best quality of football I've ever seen in my lifetime was the mid-90s to the mid-2000s. That's, I think, when football was at its best quality-wise. And this is after the Champions League has rebranded itself with the group stage and being restructured. I would say the quality was at its best between 1994 to 96 and about 2006, 2008 when tiki-taka Spanish football with the Spain dominance came in. I would argue football was at its most competitive, most entertaining, and highest quality in that period. Since then, we have seen a massive explosion of wage inflation and transfer inflation. Ticket prices are no longer sustainable. This is where the away ticket price has been capped, not the home ticket price. This is where fans and those who may go, oh, football, who are not fans of football, but don't realise that the price to go as a home fan, it is extortionate. And this is not including travel cost. Bear that in mind. As a Blackburn fan, I have been to many Blackburn games, but I can never afford to get to Ewood Park. Not only do I not drive, I do obviously have my motorbike, but it's not fixed, and I wouldn't want to ride a 125 for best part of 10 hours up to Ewood Park to find a secure place to park it where it won't get stolen, and then have to ride it all the way back again because I would have no arsehole left. On my back would be numb. And in order for me, from where I live right now, to go see my team play at home, bear that in mind, I would have to get 1, 2, 3, 4 trains and a bus. And that's about 6, 7 hours of travel time. So I'd have to leave with the first train in the morning or the night before. I'd have to leave the day before. I'd have to book a day off work on the Friday, and I'd have to book the Monday off work to get back. I would have to stay in a hotel or a B&B. That's not taken into consideration when it comes to ticket cost. This is where the football doesn't take into consideration the travel cost, the food and drink cost, the concession. They only, when it comes to football finances, the only thing they take into consideration, in fact, any sport, is ticket and the on-site stadium concessions. So the club shop, the concession stands, like food and drink. The only thing that is taken into consideration when it comes to fans spending money is the ticket on the day, if you buy a ticket on the day or if you've already bought your ticket and your collection, your ticket cost, and your food and drink at the ground. They do not take into consideration the travel costs. If you've got to stay in a hotel or a B&B for a night or a couple of nights, and they don't take into consideration that. So I've got a friend who's a Chelsea fan, and he lives near me, and he went for a match at Stamford Bridge, 400 quid for the day. That's not including the hotel that he ended up paying for at the last minute, because and that's not including parking costs in London, which are extortionate. £400 for the day that he calculated he had to spend to watch a game for an hour and 20 minutes in a stadium. So that's 90 minutes plus the half-time break. Yeah, that's not taken into consideration the travel costs, the hotel costs, the food and drink, all that. That's not taken into consideration. So unless you live right by your club's ground and you can walk there. Now, I could actually happily walk to Reading, ironically, from where I live. It might take me a couple of hours, but I could walk to the Medeski from where I live. That's not a problem for me. So I already cut that transport cost out. I know a couple of ways to get there, cut the transport cost out, but I would have to leave several hours before the game, probably in the morning, and just walk there at my leisure. Get a ticket on the gate if I wanted to, and watch the game. If the match hasn't been sold out, which the way Reading are playing this season, not like that. Now, if I was to watch Blackburn play away at Reading, yes, I could walk to the ground. There's no problem with that. But I would have to hope that the away allocation hasn't been sold out, so I can sit in the away end. And that is a problem for away fans. If the away allocations are done, they're trying to avoid crowd trouble. I understand that, but not every fan, because it's a global game, actually lives by their club. It's ridiculous. So let's say Blackburn make the playoff final. Hypothetically, we're in a position to do that. I would happily go to Wembley, absolutely. Tickets would be extortionate because Club Wembley is massively expensive. I don't like all the corporate seats where you have those empty seats at half time where all those corporates either don't turn up or they leave after 45 minutes. They stay part of the game. And that's been heavily criticised by fans is the corporates at games, corporate seats. So what we've seen since 1990, and I understand why the Premier League came about. I understand why the TV deal came about that we have now. I completely do. The game in the 70s and 80s was in financial crisis. And it wasn't just an English financial crisis, it was across Europe. The game, I think it was globally, the game was in real financial dire straits. And stadium infrastructure was a mess. Look at Hazel, which obviously that disaster. You look at the Hillsborough situation, you look at the Bradford City situation. Stadium infrastructure was crumbling. Um, the rise of the hooligan element had kept families away, so declining revenues from fan base. The economic situation in various parts of Europe as well was having an impact. Yeah, the sport was in a serious financial situation at the time. There is no debating that. So I understand why the Premier League came about. And there was actually a breakdown in the relationship between the Football League and some of the clubs in the FA. There was a whole load of issues going on as well. Very, very similar to this European Super League. There was a breakdown in the relationship between some of the clubs and the governing bodies and the league that they played in. It's a thing. The problem that we now have, and I think we'll continue to have, is player salaries are abhorrent at the level they're at. I have no doubt, I have no issue with players getting properly compensated because careers can be very, very short, and that's fine. But it is unsustainable for the clubs at the lower levels who want to make it to the Premier League or make the Championship's a financial mess. League One, League Two, financial mess. So the rebranding of the Football League and the Premier League in 1992, the TV money, the breakdown of the media rights changed, and not for the better. It used to be 50% went to the old First Division, 25% went to Division 2, and the other 25% was split reasonably evenly between Division 3 and Division 4. That was how it used to be. Since then, the Premier League gets about 70-75% of TV revenue. And then the Football League, the majority of it goes to the Championship, and then League One and League Two get pennies in comparison in the percentage of the actual TV deal that Sky, BBC, and the other overseas broadcasters have actually agreed. And this is where you get League One and League Two clubs going, we need salary caps, we need spending caps, we need transfer caps, we need cost certainty, we're going out of business. And what I find really surprising is only one club has actually folded since COVID hit 2 years ago, and one club folded just before COVID hit 2.5 years ago. I find that highly surprising. But you look at the amount of clubs that have gone into administration, that have got relegated from the Football League, ended up in the conference, gone out of business and had to reform. And you look at the stresses and strains. If we were to properly impose the profit loss margin rule of 135%, 60 to 70 clubs in the Football League and Premier League structure would be docked points straight away. Especially in the top two divisions, only a handful would be within the spending of 135% losses over profit, not excluding COVID. So the weak governance from the FA, the Premier League, and the Football League has also exacerbated the situation. Then you get the dodgy owners coming in. The directors' test was only actually brought in after Abramovich and the Glazers took over Man United and Chelsea. Questions start getting asked about, you were happy for the Glazers to get a leveraged buyout. Why don't you think there is a resistance to change? It's as simple as great. The changes that would be required to make the sport more sustainable hurts the greedy owners. And ironically, the players would have to actually see their salaries become more reasonable. I would still say they're going to get paid really well. They're still going to be handsomely paid per week. But the players, ironically, especially the top-end talent, would have to take a massive, massive pay cut. And I'm not sure the PFA is going to agree to that. Considering that back in the 60s, Jimmy Hill, and I completely agree with why Jimmy Hill did this in 1968, was he basically petitioned the FA and the PFA to get rid of the upper cap on players' earnings. And I understand the economics behind it at the time in 1968. What I find frustrating is through the 60s, 70s, into the 80s, salaries were pretty decent. As the 80s wore on, the top end talent finally were making solid cash and decent, salaries that were about 3 or 4 times your average salary of the country. So the year I was born, the average salary was around 60 to 70,000 per year for top end talent. That is now the average per week. So in 32 and a half years, the average salary has stupidly ballooned at an unsustainable rate. Now, salaries up to that point, yes, you could argue the financial issues that the sport was facing at the time were an issue. But if they had continued on that vein of the yearly salary being what is a weekly salary now, the sport would be sustainable. Absolutely. The problem is, what was a yearly salary back in 1989-1990 season, so 2 years before the Premier League, is now a weekly salary, and that is where the problem lies. The problem lies there. The problem lies with player agents, who are really underregulated, not transparent. The transfer fees are ridiculous. The record transfer fee in 1979, 1980 was like £1 million. You now have Neymar at 250 million approximately. That's not including bonuses and add-ons. So there you go. The average, the top end salary in like 40 years has exploded by 250 million%. Quite literally, it's 250 million. It's 250 times greater than what it was. So there is another problem: is the transfer fees are too much. And again, the problem is you've got too much money in the game. That's not being wisely spent. It's not getting down to the lower levels and grassroots. We know that. The UEFA coefficient has affected how the money is spread around Europe. The structuring of the 3 European Cup competitions, again, hampers the non-Big Five leagues because they get the majority of European places. So already there's issues. And we haven't even got into the fact that some competitions have ceased to exist. So some domestic cup competitions have been scrapped by certain leagues. We're not going to have that competition anymore. You have the issue of fixture congestion. You have the issue of clubs going bust, and it's not just an English problem. We've seen Italy clubs go bust all the time and reform all the time. We've seen issues of club finances, even big clubs like Borussia Dortmund and Celtic. Oh yes, we're talking historically, regularly, at the top of their leagues, have won trophies galore. Celtic, Rangers, Borussia Dortmund, Bayer Leverkusen, they've had money problems. Chelsea, before Abramovich, were basically broke, and were struggling. Look what's happened to Sheffield Wednesday, Oldham, Swindon almost went out of business. We're talking about clubs that were at the top level of their domestic league structures 30 years ago. A lot of them either have had times outside of the top league structure or have had severe financial issues. Valencia, for example, 20 years ago, they're winning La Liga, they're winning Champions Leagues. Now they can't even finish their new stadium, which has been built for 20 years. I don't understand the resistance to change. The people who will benefit, ironically, will be the players long term because their salaries are probably more likely to get guaranteed. The clubs will still make massive profits, if not more profits, because they're actually spending less money and they're spending more wisely. So actually, the owners benefit more, and the fans because the spending is capped, right? Capped. They can make massive profits. Ticket price would be far more affordable for fans. The owners are making stupid money. The players will still be making really good money, but then they're guaranteed that if the club does have a few issues, there's revenue sharing because there's a salary cap, and they're going to get paid. At the moment, there are some clubs where players are like, I'm not sure if I'm going to get paid, which means the club is in breach of contract to the employer is in breach of contract to its employees. And then you get into, employment legislation, which is a different kettle of fish from sport, but you get into employment legislation and that's really complicated. Because at the moment there are some clubs where players aren't even sure if they're going to get paid. Now Chelsea are now in that situation where there is so much uncertainty off the field, and that will be affecting the players on the field. And you can argue, a lot of things. They're overpaid. They've got all this. The players, if they're smart, have invested their money wisely, so they shouldn't worry. Blah 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 blah. But you turn that into like a League One or League Two club having those situations. It's different. It really is, and that uncertainty does have an impact. If you are working for a business and there is, you know, financial uncertainty within the business, and you don't know if you're going to have a job or have a paycheck from one week to the next or one day to the next, I don't know how, you know, that will have a massive impact. Now, with the Chelsea special operating license, after the 31st of May, that's where things get really, really complicated. Because there's now multiple offers on the table for a purchase. That's positive. The issue is whether, with the sanctions against Russian businesses and individuals that are in place, whether that a deal can be done whereby whoever owns the club, I think if Abramovich is allowed to just hand over the club, then the FA or the Premier League could take control of the club. That could be ironically, could be a possibility. And I think that should actually be a rule when clubs have dodgy owners and there are issues that the EFL, the Premier League, and the FA step in and take over ownership. It's happened in other leagues and other sports where the league will take over ownership until a suitable owner can be found and a suitable financial settlement can be found. It's happened in the NHL. It's happened in the NRL. It's happened in the AFL. It's happened in rugby union, I believe, as well, whereby the governing body or the league takes over running of the asset until a suitable financial solution can be found. There's so many bids being put forward. I know there's a local property developer who's been a Chelsea fan since he's been a kid, who I would, if I was a Chelsea fan, I would personally want to see take over the club. It's a local lad who's had a lifetime. It's Holly Valance's husband, basically, who's had a lifetime of supporting and being invested in the club. You've got the Saudi consortium, which is worth the bottomless pit of cash. But then there's going to be question marks over overseas money, especially from regimes linked to regimes that have some very dodgy human rights records. And this is where the Newcastle and Man City takeovers raise a lot of questions. With PSG takeover in France raised a lot of questions over the appropriateness of some of these owners. And there's some American ownership groups that are interested as well. And this is where it becomes very, very interesting. Yes, you have British and American investors keen to put in a bit for Chelsea, and then you have this Saudi consortium who are also keen to and I think they're the favourites. However, what I've seen online with Chelsea fans really frustrates me. The British guy, I forget his name, but he is local to Stamford Bridge, and he's been going there since he was 4 years old with his old man, and he's a British resident. He's got a British registered company, he pays his tax. And to be fair, he sounds like the perfect owner. Some Chelsea fans go, well, he's not worth enough money. He's still worth over £1 billion. He's still a wealthy man. He's not going to run out of cash overnight. Plus, the asset he will be purchasing is now a global brand. It doesn't matter because the license runs out. Under their current operating license, they can't do anything. What will be interesting is all their players out on loan. They can sell players. They can't buy any new players. It's going to be very interesting. It's very similar to the transfer embargo they had before when Lampard was manager, when he came in after their breach of youth transfer policy. Again, very similar to what's happening at Derby. Is they're totally under a transfer embargo. The problem is there are several key players like Azpilicueta, for example, who are off contract at the end of the season. And if we go into a transfer embargo, they're going to lose players for nothing, nothing. Um, and I'm not sure I'm not even sure if they're allowed to sell players. They've got so many players out on loan, but so many players coming off contract. So it, it's an interesting situation. We'll have to see what happens. And you know, yes, there is uncertainty over the future of the club. But a lot of clubs are in this situation for different reasons, and it's not the fans' fault. It's not the players who are playing. It's not the backroom staff. It's not the club staff who are working in the club shop or working as the tea lady at the training ground. I always say I have most sympathy for them because they are A, paid the least, and B, they're the first ones to be affected by, you know, league shutdowns like COVID. They're the first ones to be put on furlough. They're the first ones to be let go. They're the expendables when it comes to club finances. They're the ones who are most likely to lose their jobs. So yeah, I do feel sorry for the club staff who are basically locked out of their jobs right now, and especially staff who live in London or have to commute into London. I have, if they're working at the club training ground, like the groundskeepers, the training ground staff, like the catering staff, the security, they'll still be paid. It's the club shop staff who are screwed over. It's the club stewards because there's no fans allowed in. The ticket offices, all that kind of thing. They'll be put on a skeleton crew over there. The club shop. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens. I think that there could be issues ongoing. Same with Derby. We don't know what's going to happen to them next season either. And whether if they stay up, that'd be a miracle. If they go down, I think Wayne Rooney's done a fantastic job with the situation he's got. I think he's a far better candidate for Premier League management than some others who are currently in the Premier League. He's had to work on a shoestring budget. And he was in the same position that Tuchel's in now at the start of the season. No player transfers, like transfer embargo. He had 8 players on contract at the start of the season because they couldn't sign any new players. They had to basically go to the youth setup. They had to sign. They're only allowed to sign free agents. This is where Chelsea, I think, will be allowed some leniencies. They'll be allowed to sign those players who are free agents, so no transfer fee. So they might be able to cobble together a team. But then they could be docked points at the start of next season. Regardless, if an owner comes in after the 31st and a sale is approved after the 31st of May, which is technically when the next license starts, they technically are in administration, which means they will be hit with a points deduction for the start of next season. If a takeover can be agreed and a license can be renewed before the cut-off point and there are in constructive talks, then the club doesn't have a points deduction, doesn't have a transfer embargo. They might still have a transfer embargo, but there's more stability with the club. I know they played in different eras, but would you rather have Gary Lineker or Ruud van Nistelrooy? I'd have Ruud van Nistelrooy. More physical presence, could do more outside the box than Lineker. Lineker was more of a sniper. If we're playing the modern game, and this is the era. I think Derby will lose Wayne Rooney. There will be a massive severance fee, which could actually financially help the club going forward long term. And people say, "Oh, Lampard left the club in a mess." No, Lampard did not leave the club in a mess. It's Mel Morris, the owner, who left the club in a mess. I would have Ruud van Nistelrooy because he's a more rounded player that can play a little bit deeper and bring other players into play. Lineker is a great finisher, but he rarely scored goals outside the box. And yes, the style of football they played was different, and the eras they played in was different, and their careers were at different times. And the game has evolved. You need all 10 men out on the outfield to track back and play as a 10-man outfield unit because you've lost that sweeper role. So the keeper's now got to be a sweeper. And in the modern game, it's a 10-man outfield game, and the goalie basically is a glorified sweeper these days, which I don't agree with. You want your goalkeeper to focus on goalkeeping rather than being a sweeper, but it's that's one way Pep and the tiki taki got over having a no centre forward, was basically using the goalkeeper as a secondary defender. Really, I wish Wayne Rooney the best. And there's social media memes comparing Rooney at the same age to Ronaldo, and Rooney's just he's now. It'll be interesting to see Lampard and Rooney link up as a management duo. That will be very, very interesting. But I think they're both of them are their own man. If that makes sense. And Lampard's a little bit further down in his managerial career. Rooney's just starting out. Lampard's that's his fourth season now of management, and he's already been sacked, so he knows the managerial go around. Lampard's got Premier League experience with 2 clubs now. I'm not so sure that would work necessarily. It would be interesting to see them combined together as a management duo, but Frank Lampard's got Jody Morris as his assistant, ex-Chelsea teammate. Rooney, at the moment, I think Derby are trying to do everything they can to keep him, or if a good offer comes along from another club, is to make the maximum out of the get-out clause. So if a Championship club comes along, the get-out clause is a little bit less. If a Premier League or other European club comes along, the get-out clause is more. But he's doing a fantastic job with really limited resources. And I do hope he performs the Great Escape, considering all the 2 points deductions they've had this season. If they hadn't had those points deductions, they're mid-table. They're outside the playoffs, but they're mid-table. And considering the mess the club is in, that is a fantastic achievement. Absolutely fantastic achievement, considering the situation the club finds itself in. And it's not Lampard or Cocu or Rooney's fault. It is Mel Morris, who still owns the stadium but no longer owns the club. It's the ownership and the club structures. That is where the directors' test has failed. This is where it's been nothing but a shambles since 2004 when they brought the directors' test in by the FA, the Premier League, and the EFL. Absolutely nothing but short of a shambles. An historic club who have competed at the top level in the Premier League and the old Division One, won titles, been great for development players over the years, have had some great players play for them, has been mismanaged criminally off the field. Eddie Howe, for me, has impressed because you look at the record since he's taken over and you look at their record since the new year. They're one of the form teams in Europe. He's got them safe. I think that was his first remit. There is no way they're getting relegated. Performances have improved while the squad is still below where it should be. Given a full summer transfer window, his first full transfer window, given a full summer of recruitment, and given the backing that the owners are giving him, yeah, I can see him doing a much better job. And look what he did with Bournemouth with a far smaller budget. So I would have to disagree with you. Look at the results. It's not the style of play; it's the results. And the team is playing better. They're one of the form teams. If you look at since the new year, they're one of the top 3-4 teams in Europe for form in the top divisions. And their defensive record is they've become far more defensively sound. I think the decisions taken under the Mike Ashley era have left Newcastle playing catch up, and it's not going to happen overnight. But he does leave them in a better position than when he found them. But there needs to be a massive overhaul of the squad that he has. So while it's still not attractive, it's pragmatic. He's definitely improved the performances of players, the results. They're getting results. They're getting draws where they were losing games. They're winning games that they were drawing. And for me, that is a positive. Which modern player would be the best manager in the future? I would say it's not going to be a superstar player. The best managers are those who've either had shorter careers or played up and down the Football League pyramid in whatever league they're playing in. They tend to be actually, ironically, the best managers because they're the ones who spend a lot of time on the bench. And they normally are the dressing room leaders of a team. They're the ones that end up being the best coaches and best managers. The problem is keeping players once they retire within the game. And not, say, the media, we're talking within the coaching ranks, within the game, long term. Right now, Scotty Parker has transitioned from playing to managing really well. Lampard, I think he's doing a decent job. Gerrard's doing a decent job at Villa. Rooney's doing a decent job at Derby. they've transitioned from playing to managing really, really well. I think it's a difficult one. It is a very, very difficult one. It's. I would say Scotty Parker was I think Mark Noble. I think would make a very good assistant or a full-time manager at some point. Mark Noble, Mr. West Ham. This is last season. We know he's most likely going to retire at the end of the season. I would say Mark Noble would most likely make out of what I'm looking at on the field right now the best the best manager. Yes, he should be able. Yes, he should be able to get more players in, but it's all well and good having the money. It's spending it wisely, and that's something that some clubs have. Look at Man City. It took them so long to get a dominant side together, and they've had world class managers there. And they've had Mancini, they've had Pellegrini. Now they've got Guardiola. It took them a long time. Before Mancini, you had the Sven-Goran Eriksson experiment. Jesus Christ. Middlesbrough scored half their league goals in a season in one game against them. Let that sink in. It took them a long time to get it right. Whereas when Abramovich takes over Chelsea, they already had a very good playing squad and a very good manager in place and good structures in recruitment and player development in place. It's the finances that was the issue. Whereas Newcastle, much like Man City, have had chronic mismanagement off the field, poor recruitment structures, poor player development. So it will take longer for Newcastle to get to the top end of the Premier League and be competing for trophies on a regular basis. Was Maradona a good manager? No, absolutely not. That's my personal opinion on Maradona. Absolutely not. Superstar player, but came with so much baggage. Mark Noble has to go into coaching. Mark Noble. I can see him going to become a very good assistant, and maybe at some point a manager. I think he has great knowledge of the game. He has great knowledge of the game. He's not a superstar player. He's not a superstar. He's a solid club man, and that's the kind of person you want. It doesn't matter what level you're playing at. He's been through thick and thin with West Ham. He's stuck with them. He's had a couple of spells out on loan, yes. So he hasn't played every game for West Ham in his career, but he is exceptionally crucial to their energy, the dressing room, being a good link between the squad and the manager. And I think that's what's helping David Moyes is he's got Mark Noble in that dressing, whether he's playing or not, as a good link on the training ground and with the team to get that communication across. I don't think David Moyes had that at Man United. I don't think he had that at Real Sociedad in Sunderland. He had that at Everton with some of his senior players, and he's got it at West Ham. So that's where I think, in regards to that one, Mark Noble, I think out of the current playing group that I see, and I have watched in the FA Cup and in the Champions League and Europa League final, that's the one right now that I see can take that next step, because he's not a superstar. He's a hard-working club man. He's a squad man. He's the one who's going to be learning the most from the manager when he's not playing every game, partly because of his age, so they can't play every game. And he's one of the longest serving players at the club in the club's history. So he's spent a lot of time where he hasn't been selected every game. He has sat on the bench and he has had discussions with the manager about how to get better, tactically, the energy he brings, the effort he brings. He doesn't play well every game. No player does. But he is consistent in the energy he brings to a performance. Vincent Kompany, yes. Again, his time at Man City didn't start overly favourably. I seem to remember. It took him a while to become the established leader in that side, but it was noted by every manager who came in that he was the established leader in the dressing room. He was the established leader on the training ground. He actually changed position. He was a midfielder when Man City signed him, and he became a centre back. So he transitioned to his final role very, very well, and he adapted to it. And he was told, "This is what your position is going to be. You're going to train that position out," and he accepted it. And he was a leader, and he wasn't, the most skillful, and he wasn't the most flashy, but he had again the energy. He played through injury, and James Milner is another one. Bit more of a high profile than Vincent Kompany, I think. But James Milner's another one who I think, and he's played at several different clubs under many different managers. So I think James Milner is another good one to again have that discussion about, because he's seen different managerial styles and he's played at multiple clubs throughout his career, from his breakthrough at Leeds all the way through to obviously with Liverpool now. Absolutely could go into some form of coaching or management, but it's whether they want to. It's whether they want to. And that's another key thing. Like Harry Kewell's done it to mixed success. Teddy Sheringham's given it a go. Dennis Wise has been a failure. Tony Adams has tried, but he's better with what he does now with his addiction centre, his rehabilitation rehab centre that he runs, and I think he's fantastic at that. So again, there's a lot of personality involved in how you deal with people, and I think that's the difference. Not every player wants to go into the management side, because there's no job security. You have to remember that there is no job security, and that is a problem. That puts a lot of ex-players off, is the lack of job security and constantly moving your family around. So a lot of them, surprisingly, people got football players thick. They're not. A lot of them have gone into other vested business interests. So a lot of them now have gone into racehorse breeding and racehorse management. Some have gone into property development. Others have got roles in the media that aren't sport related. And some have invested wisely and can just relax with their family and have an investment portfolio. You can still do your management badges when you're still a player. It's just in the off season you can go to these management camps and coaching camps and get your coaching badges, and a lot of players do that to prepare themselves for a future, if they want to take that step into getting your coaching badges. And this is where I find a lot of the TV pundits, a lot of the players who retired, who just go straight into the media, haven't gone through the coaching training basically to get the coaching badges and up to UEFA and FIFA standard. And that's what I find frustrating, because a lot of them have the knowledge of the game, but they don't want to take that part. And there's a reason for that. They have more job security in the media than they do in coaching, and that is a big turn-off for a lot of ex-players. And plus the spotlight you're under and the pressure you're under, that can have a massive impact on your family life, especially when you look at like what Steve Bruce went through. Now you can debate on whether he's a solid manager or not, and you look at the amount of games he's coached. He's not bad. He's not outstanding, but he's solid. And the amount of crap he went through at Newcastle. And I'm surprised he took the West Brom job, if I'm being honest, considering the amount. And his son is an ex-player as well. I said, look, my dad's gone through all this. It's taken a massive impact on his mother, himself, his dad, Steve Bruce, the wider friends and family, having to just to see that every day for the best part of 3 years. And he was in the same position as Rafa Benitez. He got a similar level of performance out of the team, but because it was Steve Bruce and not Rafa Benitez, he got crap from the fan base. And then you look at social media, and it's just vile, And this is, I think, a negative with what we've seen with social media and sport. It's absolutely toxic as hell. Admittedly, some of the players don't help themselves with some of their antics, off the field. And I do have a lot of sympathy for Steve Bruce. Like, my job is not glamorous, and we do take a lot of crap from members of the public doing my job. But it's social media is I'll have to do a video on sport and social media, and then the good and the bad and the ugly. If it stops the TV stuff, do you think Gary Neville should? I think he's actually quite entertaining as a pundit. He's given it a go. He realises it's not for him, and that's fair enough. Roy Keane, out of all the TV pundits, is probably the one who's got the most managerial competency. But again, like, the question's been put to them, would you like to go back into football management? And they generally say no. They find working in the media a much more stable environment for them. Because again, you've got to look at, they have kids. These are guys who are got families, and they, the constant you're sacked, find another job. That does take a lot out of you as a person when you're constantly your job frame. The average now I think is about a year and a half in football management. The merry-go-round, it's too much, and it does have an impact on players. It does have an impact on their families. Whereas at least at a club, if you are going to have a transfer, you have a certain say what club you're going to go to, and then you can have that discussion with your family and your friends. I'm going to relocate. This is what is going to happen. Whereas in management, the time frame you're in there can be notoriously very, very short, and the stress that comes with it as well. It's just, is it worth mental and physical health implications? Because we've had managers have massive heart attacks, and I say that with a bit of tongue in cheek. Managers have died during games of just the sheer stress that is upon them, and it's something that needs to be considered. Is the sports coaching and sports management? It doesn't matter what sport it is not for the faint of heart. It's not for the thin-skinned. You've got to have a good support base behind you. Oh yeah, the armchair experts. Look, I try and when I do my match reviews, I'm not watching the Six Nations today. I've given up after the red card controversy the last couple of rounds. Which, while I'm an Ireland and an Italy fan when it comes to Six Nations, I feel Ireland have benefited from those two red cards, and they've got away with some. There's the lack of consistency. I've tuned out the Six Nations this year. I haven't enjoyed it as much as other years, which is a shame because I love my rugby union. But the sport is, some of the rule changes are a bit rugby league-esque. They're trying to copy what rugby league's done the last couple of seasons with line dropouts rather than 22s. The mess around the scrum. I understand protecting the players when it comes to head contact and dirty hits, but I think they're too rigid in the interpretation of the rule book, and there are too many rule variations. I think rugby league has got things right. Rugby union has got things a bit wrong. I prefer the NRL over Six Nations, and that's been the case for several years now. It is a double-edged sword with social media as a platform, as a player, and a possible income stream, but you have to deal with the crap. Yeah. Yes, but also any bit of misbehaviour. Years past, players like a George Best or a Paul Gascoigne, the attitude from fans was, "Oh, what a lad," and I think that still persists with players who have antics like Jack Grealish, for example, with his partying antics. This is the thing. They are human beings. And I hark back to what Shane Warne said in 2018 when he was interviewed by 60 Minutes Australia, which is sort of it's like an interview program or a documentary program, similar to our Panorama. And they interviewed 60 Minutes. They do investigative journalism segments, and they do interviews, specials. And his ball against Mike Gatting in '93, the ball of the century, when he was 23 years old, which is why he wore the number 23 in One Day Internationals. He said he was not ready for the media attention on just him, not the England team, not the whole Australia, just him. He was a young man, and he was not prepared for the media spotlight focused on him, the global media, not just the Australian or the Brit, the global media on him, because it became a media sensation very, very quickly. And this is at the early days of Sky Sports and satellite sport networks. He was not prepared for it. And that dogged him throughout his entire career. Every time there was a little misstep off the field, they were on him. Even post-play, they were on him. Now, yes, his drugs ban, I think, cricket wasn't ready for that. Doping cricket is not a thing. It is, but it's not every day run the mill. Players who done for doping. Happens. That was a big thing. And then his breakdown of his marriage, his relationship with Liz Hurley, some other colourful off-field antics. If you actually listen to him, he's actually a very down-to-earth guy. He was like an everyman's player. He was a salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. A bit of a character, a bit of a larrikin, as they say in Australia, a bit of a jester, as we would say over it. But he was ironically very down-to-earth and very human. And as a coach and as a commentator and as an ambassador for the game later in his career and post-career, he was brilliant. Okay, as an England fan, it was frustrating watching him destroy England, apart from 2005, destroy England on a regular basis. But at the same time, he was a very relatable character. And it is a bit of a shame, obviously, that he passed away very, very suddenly. And it did actually hit me very hard because my dad died in similar circumstances at a similar age, which we have to bear that in mind. But because of the ball of the century in the media, he was very actually self-conscious about his weight, which is why he had his drug suspension. He was trying to take weight loss, trying to control his weight. He was very self-aware of his build. When he died, he was actually ripped. He got very, very thin in his later years. He actually lost a lot of his weight, and I think pushed himself a bit too hard with his weight loss. But the Oakland Raiders in the 80s. It would be interesting to see how social media would react to the 80s Oakland Raiders, but that period in the 80s, there was a lot of off-field antics, or off ice, or off court. It doesn't matter what sport: basketball, ice hockey, American football, European football. Diego Maradona, Paul Gascoigne, for example. There were a lot of players getting up to some really chaotic, crazy antics. Same in rugby league. You listen to the podcast with ex-players, and they talk about some of the drinking stories and what I call the grog culture, the lad culture. Bearing in mind, a lot of, especially in Europe and Australia, a lot of the sportsmen and women come from working class backgrounds. I have to bear that in mind. And generally, what happened back in the day was you worked your 9 to 5 or whatever job you did, and then you played on the weekend with rugby league and cricket. Not everyone was a full-blown centralised contract professional. They were classed as professionals because they were getting paid a set salary by their clubs, but they actually had other jobs. They were truck drivers, they were tradies, they were tradesmen. Some of them worked in the coal mines up in the Newcastle Hunter region. Some of them worked in the railways. These were working class men and to a certain extent working class women in some of the sport. And that kind of working class culture where on the Friday you go down the pub, you get your week's pay, you pay your bills, give the wife and the kids some money, and you went out with your drinking money and you went out with your mates down the local boozer. And that culture has manifested itself in the modern day rugby league and the modern day cricket, because there's still that culture ingrained within the sport from the Monday to Friday, especially in rugby league. You were working as a builder, as a carpenter, as a painter, as a plumber, as a truck driver, as a scaffolder. You might be a bank clerk. Some of them actually had some white collar jobs, but you were working your Monday to Friday. Your trainings twice a week in the evenings, and then you played on the Saturday. And on Saturday after the game, you went and had a drink. You went, socialised with your teammates and the opposition. You got together in a bar or a hotel, and you had a drink with the opposition and your teammates, and then you went back. Occasionally be a game on a Sunday, and then you're back at work on the Monday, doing it all over again. Friday comes along, you're an away team and you've got to go up to North Queensland, for example, up to Townsville. You get on the train, you get on the plane, you go up there, you stay the night before, and then you play on the Saturday, and then you're back home again. But that's the culture that existed, and some of the stories that come out are just hilarious. But also, I've got the latest Phil Tufnell cricket tales. I've got his tales, Ashes tales, and I've got his cricket tales. So if I read that, the Ashes one is absolutely hilarious, by the way. I was laughing the whole way through it. Some of the antics they got up to on Ashes tours, be it Australians coming here or Ross going over there, absolutely ridiculous. I've got hang on a sec. This is the book. Now I've got his Ashes tales, and now this is the full-on cricket tales. So I bought this the other week. I haven't read it yet. Some of the antics in this. There's a famous story about Phil Tufnell when his first Ashes tour. I think it's in 90, was it 92 or 94? They played a tour match in New South Wales in the country. And they were going to play a test, I think at Sydney at the SCG. And they go to the local hotel. There's a pub near the hotel. And he's on a sesh. He nearly gets beaten up by one of the locals because he got a bit gobby because it's called Tufnell. And he goes back to the barmaid's house, which is 6 miles from the little town they're staying in. And he wakes up, he doesn't have a freaking clue where he is. And he goes, I've got to get back to the hotel. He goes, I can borrow my bicycle. He goes, where's the town? I was 6 miles down the road. Just follow the signs and then you'll find the hotel. It's by the pub. He goes, okay, I will. Before we leave, I'll drop your bike back at the pub. And she goes, that's fine. Anyway, he cycles down the road. Of course, he's still pissed from the night before. And one of the locals recognises him and thinks he's doing a pre-morning, exercise before they do some training at the town cricket club before they depart the next day. No, he hasn't. He's lost. He had to ask, and he did the excuses of, I can't find the hotel. I'm not, I haven't really explored the area though. And this local, obviously been drinking at the pub the night before with Phil Tufnell and the England team. Went, oh, your hotel's just down there. He goes, oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And the team were none the wiser that he's disappeared. That's the kind of antics they couldn't get away with now. You just can't get away with that kind of antics when you're on tour as a professional top level. But the culture, I think, it's like the Pedlo incident on the Cricket World Cup in 2007, 2008 with Freddie Flintoff and Jimmy Anderson, and then the Ben Stokes incident with Alex Hales in Bristol. We can laugh at the Flintoff Pedalo incident. He's come out in space and said he was a full-blown alcoholic during the peak of his career. And he still likes to drink now, and I've met him. He still knocks back the pint, to tell you that. And we can laugh about the Pedalo incident. It's embarrassing. Oh, it's Flintoff's out here again. But there was a lot of problems. Flintoff was really struggling with alcohol at the time. And the same thing could be said about Ben Stokes and Alex Hales back in 2017 in Bristol against the West Indies. And then you can look at the NRL, and you can look at Barbecue Gate with the St George Illawarra Dragons last season, and you can look at a whole host of other incidents. Now, on the level of stupidity, some of them are actually quite funny. Like you actually, looking back at it, you could probably laugh. But it's the image that you see from it is kind of like, these are top level athletes now. This is not the 80s, early 90s. This is the 2010s, 2020s. This is, these are got to be role models for games more professional. You've got to be role models. But I do like books like, Tuffers, and and some of the funny side of the stories. Some of them are really, really funny. Like there's Raudonikis story about, when he's playing for, I can't remember if it was Newtown Jets or Western Suburbs in what was the New South Wales Rugby League, and he's also managing a boxer, and he's got to get from the game to the boxing fight, and Tommy Raudonikis, some of the tales about Tommy Raudonikis are absolutely ridiculous. Like some of them can't even be repeated on social media. It's so funny, but at the same time, it does. That was the era he played in. It was, and there's another funny story about Matty Johns when he's emergency call up for the Origin, and how he has to get from where he was to Origin camp and the team hotel when Tommy Raudonikis was cut. Some of these stories are absolutely freaking hilarious, but it cannot. You've got to have a good team bonding culture. Not everyone is James Milner's famously teetotal, so how he would have survived in the 80s, God only knows. But I listen to some of these podcasts and some of these interviews, and I read some of these books and articles, and some of them are so funny. And when I read this book, I'm probably going to be absolutely, Tuffers, Cricket Tales. I prefer his Ashes one is brilliant. I've got to dig that out and read segments on live stream because I think you guys will absolutely laugh. But unfortunately, there is an element, and I go back to the Detroit Red Wings and the Edmonton Oilers and the Washington Capitals in the 80s. Some of their off-ice antics with players and drug use and alcohol use, and some of almost borderline criminality. Same with the Philadelphia Flyers. You know, their young goalie died in a drink drive accident. Puts a stain on what a lot of fans go was a glorious era for the sport. And God, some of the best players ever to play the game played in the 80s and the early 90s. Absolutely brilliant. How they dealt with Grant Fuhr and how they dealt with Bob Probert, I feel leaves a bitter taste in the mouth. For me, as a fan of the sport, and I was lucky enough to watch the end of Grant Fuhr and Bob Probert's careers, and I'm a massive fan of both players. Bob Probert dying young, just over a decade ago, again of a heart attack. It's very similar to Shane Warne. He was a bit of a jackalad away from the game, but he had a massive drug issue, massive drug problem. But the sport had a massive drug problem and refused to acknowledge it until a couple of high-profile players get caught. And then they get thrown under the bus, whereas the rest of the league go, okay. And I think that culture issue still persists within certain sports. I think rugby league definitely has a problem with cocaine and alcohol misuse and other drug misuse. Not just recreation. We're talking recreation. I think rugby union has had a few dark moments with Wendell Sailor and the Bath scandal with Matt Stevens. And I mean, Wendell Sailor, I've listened to interviews he's given, and he's such a down to earth guy. He's a proper nice bloke. You can't hate Wendell Sailor. I know he played for the Wallabies, obviously, in the 2003 Rugby Union World Cup. Of course, that was the enemy. But you cannot dislike Wendell Sailor because he's a really nice bloke. At the same time, yes, there's some personal responsibility. And when you've got players like Zach Hardacre, for example, who've had multiple off-field incidents where, drink driving, assault, homophobia, drug, how many more chances do you give before there is help available? You go to rehab. We're pushing because the whole Cameron Munster and Brandon Smith, the cheese, post-season drinking drug incident, and they go, "Oh, white powder, it's cocaine, it's ketamine. Come on, let's just be. It's most likely cocaine. Let's just tell it what it is. We're not stupid. Just white powder. It's cocaine. Come on." The thing is that clearly is not a new thing. This is not something that's happened overnight, guys. And Cameron Smith has come out and said, "Yeah, I went to rehab and I was struggling with alcohol and other alcohol-related incidents, drugs." And he spent a month in rehab, and the club were going to sack him. That's come out in recent weeks, in the last few days. The club was going to sack Cameron Munster. What do I think of Southgate's team selection? No Tamori again. Look, the debate on this channel about, Southgate's selections and style of play. He is winning matches. We've just come off the back of a losing final and a losing semi-final in the last two tournaments, so progression is there. In regards to his team selections, and I don't think it's just Gareth Southgate that is behind that. There is a selection committee of some kind. There's input from scouts. There's input from his backroom staff. It's not just on Southgate, but it's the style of football he ends up playing. We are set up to play fast-paced counter-attack, and he sets up not to play that, and then we don't play that style, which we don't work with possession football. There's still scandals going on now with the Premier League footballers, NFL players. Yeah, there is always something happening of a negative. Obviously, Mason Greenwood, the news on that's gone very, very quiet. Obviously, we've got Benjamin Mendy awaiting trial on multiple charges. Gylfi Sigurdsson at Everton, that's gone particularly quiet, but he hasn't played all season. You then have the unnamed player. There's a few names bouncing about Brighton. Then there's been some overseas players as well. That's not good. But that again mirrored with Wendell Sailor's son, an ex-NRL player, facing similar charges. You've got Jared Hayne facing a retrial. the aftermath of the Jack DeBellin situation. NFL, there's been ongoing things in the NFL for years, years and years and years and years and years with the NFL. And they constantly fail to guide these young men who've basically been told from high school, you're going to be going to college, and then there's your pathway to the NFL. They're not prepared to live in the real world. They're offered massive money if they're a starting quarterback or running back very, very young. They're in the spotlight very, very quickly. So yes, I think it's what we've seen in a lot of sports is the same thing. You have players who are repeat offenders when it comes to alcohol and drug related incidents, like Zach Hardacre, who just don't get the hint that it's a privilege, not a right, to be a professional athlete. And then Joey Barton, now accused of domestic violence. I mean, Ryan Giggs, his fall from grace. Yeah, really, it's frustrating because there's enough money in the sport and there's enough pathways for supporting these players, and that the sports still fail to make sure that they are kept on the straight and narrow. And I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning of the stream. They're paid too much. The salary inflation or hyperinflation is part of the problem, and it's a privilege, not a right, to be a professional sportsman or woman. It is a privilege, not a right, and a lot of them forget that. There's a lot that do remember that, and there's a lot that are very, very grounded. But those high-profile examples bring the sport down. I mean, look at players like Danny Rose. I've ripped Danny Rose an arsehole regularly on this channel. I have very little sympathy for Danny Rose asking, but at the same time, when you can see some of his teammates, Harry Kane's been on. I don't know what Harry Kane's on. I think it's about 300,000 a week, and he's looking at that, and he's looking at other players who play a similar role within, his position, who are getting paid 10, 15, 20, 30 grand, because you haven't got that salary cap in place, where you can then say the going rate for a left back, the going rate for a right back. Whereas in other leagues, I use the NRL as an example because you have pay brackets, so the going rate for a prop, a hooker, a dummy, a 5'8", a halfback, a fullback, a winger, a centre. There's a general wage bracket, so you can't really go, I want it. But then I understand, take how much he's getting paid, he feels he deserves more money. Now, unfortunately, I think he peaked very, very young and his career's gone down the toilet. Quite frankly, he hasn't lived up to expectations. However, with wages constantly going up year on year, I do agree with him going, well, a player at a rival club in the league is getting paid, let's say, 15 grand more a week. Just something. If you want to keep me, you've got, or I'll go. I will refuse a transfer request, but I'll allow my contract to wind down so you lose me for nothing. The way he went about it, and he had a bit of a whinge on social media, and he had a little bit of a whinge to the mainstream media, going, I think I want a pay rise of 100 grand. I want to get 100 grand a week, not 50, whatever it is. Because he went so public about his contract negotiations and what he felt he was worth, Levy will get rid. But Tottenham squad management's been a mess. You can argue that the mess that Tottenham got themselves in with look at the amount of players who've left Tottenham and gone on to be successful elsewhere. It's ridiculous. Every player they signed with that Gareth Bale money, that when they sold him, has gone. So their squad management and the contracts they sign players to and their transfer policy is an absolute mess. I am surprised that Harry Kane is still there. But how public that got in the summer as well with On One League and the managerial mess that they got themselves into when they sacked Mourinho on the eve of a cup final. Could not make that up. I'm not a Tottenham fan, but watching Tottenham make a mess out of being contenders to falling back is hilarious, because they had their window, they missed it, they mismanaged it. They mismanaged the whole thing, from youth development, stadium rebuild, which I don't think they needed, but they decided to do it anyway. a stadium they now can't fill, from a stadium they had had a queue going around the corner for fans to get into the stadium, as in they couldn't sell enough tickets. They were always at capacity, to a stadium that they can't bloody fill. Tells you that the team has declined. Another trophy this season. Conte going. So many class managers, so many good managers failed here. Can't be all the managers' fault. And Conte is a class manager. Martin Jol was a decent manager. Every manager since Martin Jol and Juande Ramos, all the way through, all of them have won silverware or have been competing for silverware or have had success at another club. So it can't all be the manager's fault. You then have to ask the question, what is actually going on? Because you've had so many top flight level managers come in there. Some have had success before at other clubs, some have had success since moving on. You have to ask the question, what is going on there? What is the situation at Tottenham? What is the recruitment? It's a mess. I think it's great for football in general across the board. Because unfortunately I think the PFA would probably be against it. Although I think a lot of players who are currently playing would probably actually be in favour, because they're more educated as an industry than people give them credit for. The media go, players are generally thick, right? No, that's a media stereotype. It's wrong. I think a lot more of the players would be in favour for a salary cap, because my building front door's still fucked. I think I've got to let my neighbour in. Hang on a second, back. And we're back. Sorry about that. There's an issue with our front door to our building. My neighbours upstairs are having problems getting in and out. There's a couple of us downstairs, but we have other front doors to get into the building, but the main building. Sorry about that. Something like a salary cap and a designated player rule. We already have overseas player rules in place for squad size and as such. But I think a salary cap would be a better way forward. However, I think the majority of players, I would, and I think the majority of clubs, I think, are in favour of it, especially League One and League Two, and a fair bit of the Championship, I think, would be in favour of some kind of salary cap system. I think the top end talent and some of the bigger clubs would probably be against. But if you made it UEFA League, as in Europe wide, suddenly you find a lot more clubs get on board. But I think we're too far down the track. I think if we were going to have a salary cap, it should be brought in 1992 to 97. I think we've passed the point of no return now, which is a part of the problem. While in my sporting utopia, I would be in favour. I think it could work. I think we're too far down the line now with player wages and transfers for it to work. Well, there's not enough money outside of Europe for the non-European clubs to make it work, unless you want to, because China's brought in a salary cap now, and a lot of the European and South American players that went to China are like, oh, I'm now getting how much a week? I've had a 90% salary reduction. I'm I'm gone. So a lot of coaches and players went over to the Chinese Super League, which is the most rigged league in the world, by the way. And then the Chinese government brought in strict salary cap, and a lot of players then left. I don't think it would actually overly impact. South American football just doesn't have the same amount of money. While it's very entertaining and very competitive, it just doesn't have the same global appeal as the European leagues. It's the second most popular, continent for football. But it's just not on the same level financially. So I don't see the South American League suddenly hoarding all the South American talent. That hasn't been the case for 30 years. I do think, however, that I think we are past the point of no return with European football at least. Um, what's my take on the MLS? Well, if there's still ongoing issues with the European leagues and clubs in financial distress, and as the MLS grows year on year and fan numbers are good, I can see more top level talent, not the superstars, but more top level talent. Just going sod it. I'm going over to the MLS. There's more. I'll get more salary security. There's less media spotlight in your face. So those players that are and those players' families that are struggling with the media being in their face, they can become anonymous over there in some of the markets. They can become anonymous and the Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NHL superstars, and the NBA superstars get all the media attention, and they can live a quiet life, get paid a solid salary, and they can just go about their daily lives with their families when they're on their off days or off season, and not worry about the intense media speculation that they get over here. That's what a lot of players that have been based in Europe have said, is that they can live anonymously. Now, obviously, that wasn't the case for Ibrahimovic or David Beckham, for example, but a lot of players who've gone from European or South American football to the MLS have basically become almost anonymous in the sense that who's messaged me? Someone's messaged me. They can go under the radar. It's like when a North American sport goes to a non-traditional location as well. Again, the players love it because again they go, no one really knows who we are. Like they're obsessed with the big market sport. They can live under the radar without the media in their face. Biggest problem everyone has in the MLS is no pro relegation. No, it's a franchise system. It won't come in. The league, the Players Association, Players Union might vote for it, but the league owners won't. And with the way the league is developing nicely and progressing nicely, don't rock the boat. It's the American system. They don't believe in promotion relegation. Their owners don't, which is why a lot of North American owners, when they invest over here, really struggle to get that kind of concept, which is where the European Super League idea came from. And I did my video on the Fenway Sports Group. I might have to do a video on the Glazer family and their holding company that owns Man United and their history in sport and their role with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Man United and all the Glazers' ownership of Man United since 2004 and the issues that have come with that. And there's been some success, but there's been a lot of issues along the way, more negative than positive. It's a franchise model over there. It's a club community model over here with promotion relegation. The North Americans don't get that. The fans have bought in. Obviously, the North American fan base has bought into the European sports and bought in massively. Not just to football, but other sports as well. They've really bought into the whole club dynamic where it is community based, where there is instead of having a draft, you have a community kind of, you develop your youth system from the early days and grassroots all the way up to the senior team. Same with Australian sports. The Americans have bought into the Australian sports as well, like the NRL and AFL. Now, the AFL does sort of have a draft. It's not on the same level as over in the US and Canada, but there is a draft. The NRL, much like European club sport, again develops with youth academies, has its catchment area for youth development. On the other hand, there are new winners every other couple of seasons, like Portland, Columbus, not big teams, but have won. Yes, there is that. Because there's a salary cap, there's cost certainty, and therefore there's a competitive nature there's a design behind it. Now, in practice and in ideas, it's different because you have different styles of salary cap. Now, we've seen salary cap breaches, and that normally happens in both codes of rugby, ironically. And there's transparent cap, and then there's non-transparent cap systems. There's hard and soft, and luxury tax with the Major League Baseball, the luxury tax, which is not actually a salary cap system at all because the wealthy teams just don't give a flying fuck. And so Major League Baseball is the least competitive, I think, of the four major leagues in North America when it comes to teams making the playoffs and then teams going on to have playoff runs, and those teams that miss the playoffs, how often are a team outside the playoffs? There's a certain exceptions where teams are just generally bad for a long period of time, like Buffalo, for example, and Arizona in the NHL. But there's generally, okay, this team will make the playoffs within every so often they'll get in. But Major League Baseball is just an absolute shambles. Um, um, the issues in regards to um, salary caps. Um, it, I think in European sport, rugby union is clearly not working how it should. Um, because of the Leicester Tigers and Saracens. That shows if you are going to have a salary cap or a spending cap system, and this is where financial fair play and the profit loss 135% rule with football was failed as well. Governance. If you have strong governance in that area, you are less likely to have teams caught breaking the rules. When you have weak governance and weak punishments that can be easily appealed against, which we've seen in European football, then teams will continue to flout the rules because they know the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and when they do get caught, they can appeal against or have very little um, in regards to, you know. And this is what we've seen. And I'm going to do a video on the Melbourne salary cap scandal in the NRL and then comparing it to the Parramatta and the Canterbury Bulldogs, and whether the NRL dealt with those issues correctly. And, you know, you could argue they all happen in different eras of the NRL. So, you know, Canterbury were first, Melbourne was second, Parramatta were third, and there were different NRL CEOs and the governance of the game was different. But in each circumstance, it was always the same recurring theme with third-party payments and lack of transparency over that. And Parramatta really did themselves. They put it on the company books. I mean, they weren't even subtle about it. And it the Parramatta are now being sued for $1 million Australian dollars. It's been 6 years since their salary cap scandal. They are now being sued basically by one of the creditors involved or someone involved at the time who feels their own money. So years after the event, they are still feeling the impact of that. Melbourne Storm one. I think that's the reason why people like to hate the Melbourne Storm, is because of that salary cap breach. The Canterbury Bulldogs have had cap issues for years, and I think the way the NRL dealt with that shows weak governance, but then really reactionary punishments, and the way the punishments varied from team to team, you know, frustrates fans. It's the same with Saracens and Leicester, the Tigers in English Rugby Union. Leicester were very smart with their breaches. They made sure they were just below that threshold before points deduction. So they really knew what they were doing. Saracens knew what they were doing, but didn't know what they were doing, if that makes sense. Leicester was smart and got away with their salary cap breach for longer as well. And the ironic thing is, they're the top two in the Premiership right now. So in reality, they haven't adequately been punished. And now the Premiership's ring-fenced itself, and fans are not happy with that. And then you got the issue with the CVC stake within the game, the investment capitalists. There's concerns about their involvement, and is it actually going to benefit the sport and the league of the Six Nations long term? So salary caps can be very iffy, and there's always loopholes in the rules that are actually within the rules, like long-term injured reserve, where you can just like put a guy on long-term injured reserve if he's not going to play for a while to free up cap space. But I do think, in a perfect world, European football would have a salary cap Europe-wide. However, I do believe that the big clubs would be massively against it. You wouldn't get the required. You would have to have it either by unanimous or two-thirds decision when it came to board meetings. I just don't think the clubs are willing to get on board unless you made it the full Football League and Premier League, all 92 clubs. You might get the two-thirds majority required to bring in a stepping stone of salary cap. So Premier League's at one level, then the Championship, then League One, and then you have a tiered salary cap system. But again, in practice, I think we're past the point of no return in that regard. And this is what really surprises me about the Major League Baseball lockout and how they're still going with this flawed luxury tax system, which benefits the wealthy teams. I generally believe. I, I generally believe that, yeah, if we get a time machine and go back to 1992, a salary cap should be introduced. Um, and we've missed the boat by 30 years. That's what I honestly believe we're at, is we're 30 years too late. Now, we could argue in hindsight, could it work? If governed properly and worked out correctly with the TV deals and the revenue streams and revenue sharing, and obviously you're predicting that revenues will go up and TV deals will get bigger, and crowd numbers would be good, and ticket sales would be good. Then you can say the cap will go up by a percentage every year. So the players would honestly, you look at those leagues that have brought in salary caps, the players are now better paid than they've ever been, ironically. However, in reality, it's not the case. Now, I do honestly believe that if we have more, let's say, American ownership in European football, we would be more likely to have a salary cap system brought in. But we'll see what happens. I'm an idealist when it comes to this topic, but I think we're 30 years too late, and the damage has been done. And there's got to be, if we're going to have financial fair play and we're going to have the 135% loss over profits rule, they need to be more rigorously enforced. But the PR damage that would then happen to European football because of that is why it's not. We have weak governance. And then you can have clubs just purely appeal it, and then depending on the appeal they put in place, the standing they have in the game, then their punishment's reduced. So, and if the Football League and the Premier League were to properly enforce the 135% rule, I would say 60 to 70 clubs would be in breach in some way, shape, or form over the last whatever time frame they're looking at. And that would be an absolute disaster, because so many teams would be docked points and fined. It would be ridiculous, and therefore it's an absolute nightmare. So they bring a rule in, they don't fully enforce it, and that's where the problems lie, is the weak enforcement. You put rules in place but then don't strongly enforce them, then when clubs do get caught and made examples of, other clubs are going, oh, we've got away with it, and we'll continue to get away with it because we're not being brought to task. And when you've got clubs in League One and League Two crying out for a salary cap, and their calls for more cost certainty within the sport being ignored by the powers that be, and the struggle they had to get emergency funding just over a year ago, tells you all you need to know about the situation that the sport finds itself in. COVID exposed quicker financial bubble bursting in football. I reckon within 5 years it would have happened. We would be in the situation in 5 years' time, if not for COVID. COVID highlighted the issues that were in place and sped up the financial meltdown of football. But I think within 5, maybe 10 years at max, we would have been in this position in the 2030s or the late 2020s when it comes to football finance. I honestly believe we would have been in this position down the track. COVID sped up the financial meltdown and the financial struggles that even massive clubs like Barcelona and Real Madrid are facing right now. I honestly believe we would have still got there. The financial and industry experts were looking at other industries that have overheated financially, going, how can football and sport in general, football especially, continue to have the overinflated finances that it does, be it player wages, ticket prices, and transfers. And they were still surprised it kept getting through. Every time there was a recession or an economic wobble, football carried on storming through as a general, although locally there are issues. And the the experts were like, how the hell is this still a thing? Now, can the MLS become a top 10 league? I think it's possible. As I say, if European football continues to have issues with the finances and clubs, big clubs having problems, and transfer embargoes imposed upon clubs like the Chelseas, and clubs hitting the wall financially, then yes, the MLS can definitely fill that void. It's all about how it markets itself and getting the top end talent to A, be willing to take a slight pay cut, but B, be willing to go over there and grow the game in large numbers. So there has to be that willingness from the players at least, and for fans to buy in, because the North American fans are bought in. There's no doubt on that. But it's a different culture over there when it comes to their sports, um, and players and sponsors would have to adjust to that different culture, and different league structure. But it's definitely possible. You have to remember how European football marked the clubs. Clubs were the ones that branded themselves and sold the product to North Americans. Now the North Americans are bought in; they've got their own product. The the league itself has to brand itself overseas and to its domestic audience in a similar fashion, but the product has to be exciting, and some, it has to be. We'll have to see what happens in regards to the MLS and whether it can grow as a league and be entertaining as a league, and whether it can grow as a league. Um, that's it, really. You won't see a worldwide football salary cap, but you'll see league wide or association like UEFA wide. That's more plausible than a global salary cap. But I think each individual league was, if it was to impose a salary cap, would give cost certainty, and then you're only allowed so many marquee signings, and that has to fit under your salary cap. So teams like PSG just would not function, um, if salary caps were brought in, which is what French football is screaming out for, is more cost certainty. PSG would just not be able to function as other leagues are with the amount of players they've got. You wouldn't have a Barcelona, Real Madrid ending up in the situation financially they're in with a salary cap system. And I can genuinely think that if you're a club that's suddenly hit massive financial difficulties, you're going to want to bring in a salary cap. You're going to want to use your brain to maximise your profits and reduce your costs. But look at the situation they've got themselves in. But in order for a salary cap system to work and work efficiently, you need strong governance and strong leadership. And that is something that a lot of sports have been lacking for a very, very long time, is really strong governance when it comes to the financial side of sport. The governance and the financial mismanagement is plain for all to see and has been exposed over the last 2 years. So until we have stronger, more robust governance and stronger financial rules that are properly enforced, when I say properly enforced, we're going to see more issues that we are seeing now down the track. And that does put off potential investors. That does put off um, potential stability, which you need. And again, Simon Jordan, whether I do disagree with him on a lot of topics, he hit the nail on the head. And it's not just English football, which I think top European clubs and top European leagues have been mismanaged ridiculously, and there's corruption within the sports now. And he hit the nail on the head. And was quite brutal about hitting the nail on the head as well. He didn't hold his punches. Let's just say that he did not hold his punches, um, in regards to what he had to say in regards to the financial mess and where money comes from, and the greed and mismanagement. He was brutal in his TalkSport segment. And that is a radio station and a broadcaster under a lot of scrutiny right now, and a lot of pressure, with a lot of issues with the direction that the sports that radio channel is taking. But Simon Jordan hit the nail on the head. I do disagree with him on a lot of things, but in this case, I'm in agreement. From a fan's point of view, I don't think the amount of money within the game has benefited the overall product and benefited the sport as a whole. I think the direction that football has taken in the last 30 years has been at the detriment of fan, non-playing staff, the product we get. There you go. Anyway, I'm going to call that a day. I really appreciate the questions and the topics we've discussed over the last 2 hours. I'm going to be watching the football, the Middlesbrough-Chelsea FA Cup tie, if I can. That's on free to wear. Thank you very much, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.